afternoon and welcome to our first live online session of this afternoon, which is our third day of the altc22 conference. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. So for the next 30 minutes we have Peter Tiernan presenting for us, and his session is titled Gently Down the Streaming. Can digital literacy help turn the tide on the climate crisis? So let's give a very warm welcome to Peter Tiernan.
Thank you, Fiona, and thanks everybody for virtually having me this afternoon. Good afternoon to you all. I have spent the last couple of days following the hashtag on Twitter, so it looks like you all have been having a wonderful conference, some great talks that I've been following the reactions to. So I hope you continue to enjoy the conference. So, as Fiona says, my name is Peter Tiernan. I'm a lecturer in the Institute of Education at Dublin City University. I've been researching and interested in the area of digital literacy for over 10 years. I always wonder does it sound more prestigious to say over a decade or over 10 years? So we'll just go with over 10 years. Predominantly early on, I was really interested in looking at digital literacy in practice. So I felt that there was a lot of talk about what our students should be able to do rather than what they can do. So a lot of the work that I did over the last 10 years or so was around setting up activities and assessments for students around using digital content, and then working with them to see what were they able to achieve, what were the challenges, what was their understanding of using digital content, etc. Anyway, so just to say that, you know, I've had an interest in this area for a long time. But over the last couple of years, I've been, I suppose, like us all, just watching what's happening globally, internationally with climate change, and watching the headlines. And I've become very interested in what's happening to our environment and the impacts that humanity is having on our environment. And I was involved in a number of projects where I was analysing some of the digital literacy frameworks, etc. And I just began to look and see, well, you know, what focus are we putting on this area when it comes to digital literacy, and could we be doing more in terms of how we as academics work with our students and broader society around digital literacy, and how we work with our students in that regard when it comes to the impact that it may have on the environment. So I suppose just a quick overview to start, and I'm sure you're aware, those of you who are here are aware of this anyway, but we know that like the ubiquitous availability of technology has completely transformed our lives, the way we communicate with each other, whether that's through social media platforms, WhatsApp, and all of the different apps and social platforms that we use to communicate with each other. It's transformed the way we work, whether that be, you know, the last couple of years and the ability to work remotely. I mean, if the pandemic had a hit 20 years ago, would we've been able to keep going the way we did? So that's changed our ability to work, and also the way that we work. It's changed the way people learn, both in a formal sense, the ability to learn online, asynchronously, remotely, but also in terms of lifelong and life-wide learning, so people can participate in learning interventions at times and in spaces that they weren't able to in the past. And also huge impacts on how we consume our media, you know, so the volume of content that's available to us has soared, and also the ways in which we can engage with that content has soared. And I suppose it's within that context that digital literacy is recognized as this essential skill. Sorry, I was just keeping on our comments there, as an essential skill for 21st century living or modern living, and for that lifelong and life-wide learning. And, you know, that's evident in policy documentation at national, international, European level, advocating for the development of digital literacy skills, and highlighting the importance of digital literacy. And it's also evident in the academic literature as well. I mean, there's countless publications that look at the importance of digital literacy, what it is, what it looks like, what it should look like, what it will look like in the future. So there is a recognition that this is an important skill. But as I said at the start, one thing that's kind of hit me over the last couple of years is, as we as we are, on the edge of what looks like, a change in the global climate because of human activity, do we have an opportunity, I suppose is one way of putting it, or is it time to look at how we are informing our students and society about digital literacy in terms of technology and how it impacts on their lives? And is there an opportunity to focus the attention on the impact that technology is having on the environment? And really today, what I'm trying to do is start a conversation around this. And maybe I should have said this at the start, but obviously, I'd like to keep this conversation going with anybody that is interested, and my contact details are there. If you connect with me on Twitter at ptphoneHome, or on email peter.d.tiernan@tcu.ie. So this is a conversation I would like to keep going, and I'm interested in speaking to anybody in the field who has an interest in this intersection between climate change and digital literacy. So this is not intended to be an exhaustive list of all of the different technologies and their impacts on the environment, but I just thought I'd do a quick snapshot of some of the things that maybe aren't captured regularly in the literature. There is academics who've done wonderful work. I know that Neil Selwyn comes to mind in terms of ed tech and the impact of ed tech, and the next new shiny thing, and do we really need the next new shiny thing all of the time? But there's not as much done on what's happening in individuals' day-to-day lives. As I said, this is just a snapshot of some of the different impacts that technologies and services and tools may have on the environment. So if we look firstly at some streaming services, so you're all more than aware that the likes of Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus the user base has soared in the last number of years. EU statistics that I could get my hands on: 67 million subscribers on Netflix in the EU, 2.2 million subscribers to Amazon Prime, which no doubt is going to quadruple now with the release of the Lord of the Rings show. And the amount of time we're spending watching streaming services is increasing too. And obviously all of this has an impact on the environment. So you have data centers that are needed. You have all of the networking technology that's needed in order for us to be able to watch this in the speed that we want to watch it at. So there's not lag, it's not pixelated, it's clear. Netflix offering 4K streaming. All of that takes resources, takes energy, and has an impact on the environment. But there's some interesting kind of nuances in this data too. For example, if we look at the amount of emissions that are generated by watching a YouTube program. If you watch it on a smart TV, let's say a 40-inch smart TV, and you switch that to watching it on your smartphone, there's an 80% reduction in the amount of emissions that viewing takes. So, questions asked: if I'm sitting watching a Netflix show on my own on the couch, would it be better if I watch this on a tablet, or switched off my smart TV and watched it on my tablet? Would it really impact the viewing experience? Maybe, maybe not. But being conscious or being aware of some of the impacts that might have on the environment. Something like Spotify. So we know that shift away from the likes of vinyl and CD, although must commend the re-emergence of vinyl as a niche collector's item, which is great to see. But the predominantly the move away from vinyl and CD has vastly reduced the amount of plastic that is needed for music production and distribution. But overall, greenhouse emissions from storing and distributing music online have doubled since the year 2000. So again, there's a lot of work done on the greening power of edtech and the promise of the greening power of edtech. And is it always what it's cracked up to be? And I think the same, we may tend to think that because the reduction in production costs of music, that must be a positive, that must have a positive impact on the environment. But the research suggests that in some areas that's not the case, and it's just what I suppose what I'm starting to build towards is this informed decisions and just being informed about the impact that our use of technology has. social media too. I see a question there. I'll come back to it now in 1 second. Social media too. At the onward march of social media and the proliferation of devices and platforms into new markets and new platforms into existing markets. Facebook and Twitter, probably the grandfathers of social media at this stage. And then you've all the new platforms like TikTok and Instagram, although that's not really new at this stage. All of that coupled with, this, I suppose, insatiable appetite to store our lives online, to have a picture for everything and have that picture uploaded to cloud storage, has an impact on the amount of storage that's required, which obviously necessitates these organizations to have increased data centers. And the energy demand for data centers is about 1% of global energy demand, which is as much as a small country. And that's despite, there's huge pressure on technology giants like Facebook and Google to develop more renewable practices around the energy that's required to run these data centers. So I'll just take a pause just to look at some of the questions. I see Vicky. Yeah, and so actually that may be the next slide. I haven't got presenter view on. I'm not sure, Vicky, if that's the next slide or the slide after. I've just a comment or two on Zoom. So Steve, that comment there in relation to the energy consumption was just related to the device. Apologies, sorry, I'm used to being able to scroll wheel back up. That comment was specifically around the device. So there I imagine there's also implications around you don't need to stream a 4K image to a mobile phone either. The maximum you might need is 480p or so. So that probably has implications also. Thanks for that, Steve. Yes, I think I said that. So then on to, this is, I suppose, related to Vicky's comment there. So we know that the ability to have our lectures and meetings and conferences online drastically reduces the carbon emissions and the energy consumption. So sorry, alt attendees. And that is due to, heating a building, lighting a building, all of the catering costs, all of the impacts of those, people flying to conferences, all of that has its own cost implications. So we know that having lectures and meetings online has the potential to reduce the carbon emissions and the energy consumption required to do lectures and meetings, etc., along with some of the other benefits and challenges that are associated with that. But what I found interesting just doing some research for this was my university, certainly we during COVID had a camera on policy in as much as possible for increased engagement. But might we consider, is it a sacrifice worth making, that if we went camera off unless required? So let's imagine myself and Dom and Vicky and Steve are on a lecture together, and it's only when I ask, sorry, I see Stuart and Peter there as well. It's only if I ask Stuart a question, he puts on his camera to reply. That camera off unless required could further reduce the energy consumption for platforms like Zoom by up to 96%. So again, this is not, my area is digital literacy as opposed to energy. I'm not an energy researcher. I'm not a carbon emissions researcher. I'm not on that side of the fence, so to speak. This is a snapshot, I suppose, just to raise the conversation about raising awareness of this with our students and wider society. I'm just going to do a time check, 30 minutes. Okay. Similarly, reducing unnecessary and thank you emails could save the carbon equivalent to 3,000 diesel cars a year. Some of your research there. So all of the little things that add up. So that's, as I say, just a snapshot. It's not an exhaustive dive into the carbon emissions and the energy consumption of all of our day-to-day habits, but I just wanted to give a snapshot of that. So then, through my work and for this also, just wanted to look and see, well, what are academics and our conceptualizations and the frameworks that we have around digital literacy? What are they saying currently? And are they mentioning digital literacy? So if we look at some of the definitions and some of the more commonly cited definitions of digital literacy in the literature. You see, we go from slightly chronological there, Martin, Ning, and Kim, and Churchill there in 2020, so just a snapshot. So if we look at, for example, Martin in 2005 said it's about using digital tools to identify, evaluate, analyze, and synthesize digital resources. Ning in 2012, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, sorry, I've moved out of the light there a little bit. The ability to search for, evaluate, understand, and integrate information found online. Kim in 2019, using digital technologies to analyze, evaluate information, and bringing in the communication with others. And then Churchill talked about the same things, really, except also the need to use information to address authentic problems. So absolutely no criticism. I mean, in publications I would have done in the past, I would have arrived at similar definitions of digital literacy. All of these scholars have really important contributions to make to our discussions around digital literacy. But just in the context of today's conversation, there's little evidence in the academic literature around the environmental impact as an element of digital literacy. And as part of the research that I've done, I wouldn't call it a full systematic review of the literature, but just let me find the data here, 1 second. Yeah, so I did a search on five databases. So Academic Search Complete, Access Science, Applied Social Sciences Index and Abstracts, and the British Education Index. And I searched for digital literacy and climate change in the abstract or title, digital literacy and carbon footprint in the abstract or title, digital literacy and global warming in the abstract or title, and digital literacy and environmental impact in the abstract or title, and it returned no relevant results. So as I said, very important contributions, but there seems to be a lack of discussion in the literature around this area. And then some of the conceptualization of the different categories, or as some authors have described it, the literacies of the digital. Again, just a snapshot here. I won't bore you by reading it all out, but you can see there's lots there around being information savvy, for want of a better way of putting it, being critical around the media that we consume and our use of the media, being able to work together digitally, being responsible, socially responsible, the ability to work with, on a cognitive level, digital content, so to understand it, to repurpose it, to create new knowledge from digital media. That's all present in the current categorizations of digital literacy. But again, not to hammer the point home too much, there's little evidence of the environmental impact as a digital competency. And then if we take a look at some of the digital literacy frameworks, this is by no means an exhaustive list. Again, I have, as part of a number of projects I've been involved in over the last 12 to 24 months, I've had to engage with a number of these frameworks. This is just a snapshot on these slides, rather than, we don't have the time either to go through all of them. So looking at the Digicom Framework 2016, the UNESCO framework, which I'm sure you are all aware is essentially built on top of the Digicom framework, JISC, Open University, and the British Columbia Digital Literacy Framework. All of these, again, have done great work in helping us to conceptualize digital literacy, compartmentalize it, I suppose, in one sense, so that we can tackle some things in some areas. For example, in science, you might look at a specific aspect of digital literacy. If we look at more social skills, you might look at another aspect of digital literacy, like critical digital literacy and being critical of the information we consume. Anyway, a slight tangent there, but so they've all done great work. They've all done great work. Q&A is starting in 5 minutes. I better move. Thank you for that reminder. They've all done, so they provide us with a great scaffold in terms of what digital literacy is. It's being a confident consumer of digital information, a confident creator, being safe and ethical online, etc. But the only one that really mentions it is the DigiCamp and UNESCO frameworks have it nestled under digital safety, and they talk about understanding the environmental impact. So I suppose for those, I'm not sure if people are joining or they're just commenting. If anybody joined, the purpose of today, and I really appreciate the opportunity provided by Alt to have a conversation, and I suppose a conversation that I'm trying to build on, is what I want to start talking about is how can we begin to take steps around digital literacy, and those of us who are interested and involved in teaching and in universities and other contexts around digital literacy education. There is a potential to refocus on it. I want to start that conversation today. And there is a potential to think about guiding students to be more critical users of technology in an environmental sense, and also understand the impact of technology on the world. Just to return to one slide here, which I don't think I said it at the time, two of the biggest culprits for energy consumption are TikTok and Reddit. And it's not that, I'm not suggesting that if you told your first-year undergrad students that, look, out of all the social media platforms that are available to you, TikTok is the one that is worst for the environment, not all of them would suddenly decide, okay, TikTok is bad, I'll move to another platform. But it might begin to build that awareness in them. That different platforms and different approaches, different uses of technology at different times may have different impacts on our environment. So some of the things that I've been thinking about are the original definition. So Gilster coined the term digital literacy back in '97. And he said, what I was thinking about repurposing his definition. So we might say that digital literacy is the ability to, or an aspect of digital literacy in the context of the environment might be the ability to locate and understand information regarding the impact of digital tools and use this information to make decisions which take account of the natural environment. So some of the framing that we're already familiar with. So we're already familiar with locating information online as an aspect of digital literacy, understanding information online as an aspect of digital literacy. So it's just trying to use the language that we're familiar with and try and think about how we might encourage our students to look at this aspect and become informed users of technology in this regard. Taking Martin's definition, we might encourage students to identify their current digital activities and analyze their carbon footprint before evaluating areas where improvements can be made. So again, taking existing definitions that we're familiar with and trying to repurpose it so that it shifts the focus onto the environmental impact of technology. Kim, which promoted really the communication of our findings. So that was the key differentiator in Kim's definition. So you might encourage students to construct new meaning of their investigations, build a picture of their trends associated with how they go about their work, their study practices, social practices, and then in a manner that encourages them maybe to become advocates of this and communicate their findings with a wider audience. So using existing digital literacy skills and building on that in terms of contributing to the discussion around the impact of technology on the environment. I'm very close to time, I think. So just to say that if we look at the frameworks, also I think attention could be paid to the frameworks. DigiCamp has done a lot of work in increasing the visibility of the environmental impact section on their framework. Some of the others have not. And I suppose for me, when I look at it, if my institution is wedded to the JISC framework, let's say, and that's the one that I consult on a regular basis, to me, that means that people in that institution may miss out on this aspect. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, as my third slide said, as we're on this precipice of potential climate catastrophe, to take some stock of what we're doing with regards to technology. And I believe that digital literacy, while it has its critics in terms of becoming too bloated and an umbrella term that that takes in everything to do with digital and online. I think those of us who are involved in developing these frameworks should take a look at our next iterations and consider including the environmental impact there. So just, I suppose, to close, what are the positives of this? If we begin to increase the focus on environmental impact as a digital competence, firstly, it could increase our students' and society's potentially understanding of the cost of tech. It could promote a more critical use of tools and services in our day-to-day lives. And on a broader point, if our students and society becomes more aware of the impact of technology, it may have a spillover effect into other aspects of their lives. So for example, if I'm changing car, would I be more aware of the potential environmental impact of the car I drive, fast fashion, all of that, renewing my phone? There's lots of stats that I didn't have time to consult or present today around mobile phone renewal and how it's the average across the EU is 18 to 24 months. For more than 60% of EU citizens renew their phone every 18 to 24 months, and all of the environmental costs that go along with that. Would increasing the environmental awareness around our use of digital tools in our day-to-day lives, would that contribute to a broader understanding? So I think that brings me to time. I'm sorry, I know I sped up significantly towards the end and didn't get a chance to consult some of the questions that were in the box, but I believe we have time now, if I'm correct. And I'm not sure, do I read the questions or do I take questions now?
Hi, Peter. You can read the questions, or I've just posted a message in the chat to ask people to post them if they have any questions.
Okay. So just while I'm scrolling through the chat there, or anybody wants to post them, I mentioned this at the start. I'd love to continue this conversation. And anybody who wants to connect with me can do so on Twitter or catch me on email. And yeah, it's as I said at some point during it, I really appreciate the opportunity from Alt to do this, because it's a developing thought process in my own mind, and I wanted to have the conversation. So I appreciate that, and I'd love to continue this conversation with other academics or anybody in the field. I hope you wrote a paper on this, Peter. I actually did. So it's in press. The Nordic Journal of Digital Literacy will be the issue in October 22. It will have this publication there. Thank you. Is there a danger that institutions will pay lip service? Potentially, and that's why, Peter, that's why I was really keen when I was looking at this on academic definitions to change too, because if it becomes part of discourse in various aspects of education, for example, I predominantly work in Institute of Education, so I work in teacher ed at primary, post-primary, and further education levels. I mean, if I begin bringing this into conversation, then other educators will see it who may or may not be overly tech savvy, or may or may not have tech on their agenda. Apologies, this is my phone's ringing in my office. So it's a good question, and I think it's something we need to be aware of. Peter, nice. How could institutions think? Somebody really wants to speak to me. Apologies. How is it possible for some HEIs to take a stance? Is it possible? How is it possible when some? Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of institutions that at the time said things won't go back to the way they were, and then suddenly once the pandemic was over, they went back to exactly the way things were. So I do think that there's opportunities to. This is maybe a broader conversation, but to learn. While the pandemic was miserable in lots of ways, we learned a lot about how we could really be flexible in our delivery modes and delivery mechanisms. And I think it would be a shame to completely forget about and lose all of those flexible interactions and flexible timetables and all that stuff that happened. I think it would be a shame to do that. And I do think that institutionally there should be flexibility in terms of offering blended face-to-face online modalities for students, regardless of whether they be undergrad, postgrad, etc. So I agree, Leonie. Oh, I think by the name, nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time, if I'm remembering the right person there. So I haven't, Stuart. So as I mentioned at some stage during this, my area really is digital literacy, and I had to read myself into some of the aspects of climate change. Just I was looking at what are the day-to-day uses that we have. What are the day-to-day uses of technology, and what are some of the potential detrimental impacts of that on the climate and on the environment. I think it would be very interesting. I'm just started a collaborative project with Dr. Ben Mallon here in the Institute of Education, and he is much more au fait with this area than I am, and we're looking at tracing the development, production, sorry, I'm trying to find the right word, the production of a mobile phone from start to finish, and ending with the use of that mobile phone around apps and software, and we're trying to trace that and see how that might feed into this area. But thanks for the question, Stuart. I think it's an interesting next step. See comments earlier in the chat, Dom. I can't see that, Dom. I'm trying to scroll and find this. Was it Dom, you said this yourself? Yes, you did. Okay. Okay, so Dom, you sound like you are more knowledgeable in this area than I am. I'm interested to read that carbon footprint is predominantly pushed by the fossil fuel industry, and we should be talking about climate shadow. And I certainly, if that is the conceptualization that would make it broader in terms of being able to address these issues, then I would welcome, a conversation around what that would look like. What's, as opposed to carbon footprint. That is the term that I encountered over and over again when I was going to look for the impacts, environmental impacts of the different tools that we use on a day-to-day basis, was the carbon footprint, emissions, greenhouse gases, etc. They were the things that were coming through. So I'd be interested to hear more about that.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Peter. That was fantastic. A really lively debate and lots of interesting questions coming in. I have posted the link to our Discord channel, where anyone who wants to continue the chat can move over to there and continue speaking about the really interesting presentation you've given. So thank you very much. And a big virtual round of applause for Peter.
And thanks to you, Fiona, for facilitating me. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming along.